The last thing we'll cover in this module is workload management. Now this is going to stay somewhat high level because workload management is definitely not for the faint of heart. It's fairly easy to cause more performance problems than you solve if you don't know what you're doing and understand the effects of the specific configurations. A common joke goes something like this: I had a problem with performance, and then I tried to solve it with workload management. Now I have two problems. With that warning issued, when done correctly, it is a very powerful feature, something available in popular competitor products such as SQL Server with the feature that SQL calls Resource Governor. I've used it sparingly and with some success. I've also implemented it and then immediately turned it off. Workload management is based on query queues. These are comparable to the checkout lines at a grocery store. Now, it's not a perfect analogy for reasons that I'm going to point out in a second, but it is a good place to start. Consider a grocery store with a single checkout line. You want to buy one single item, but you're stuck in line behind a shopper buying hundreds of items, and they have coupons for all of them. Pretty frustrating for the single user. So the grocery store, noticing this type of frustration being common, decides to open up a fast lane, just for shoppers with a few items. They say up front that you must have fewer than, say, 10 items to use in that lane. Workload management is basically the same. You can create multiple query queues with rules for each, controlling what types of queries can be placed into what queues. Taking the analogy a little bit further, if you have several people in the normal checkout lane and they're all waiting on each other, and then you have the fast lane sitting over there by itself with nobody in it, this can kind of be frustrating to those queries that are stuck in the queue. They see an available resource, but they can't access it because they don't meet the rules of that lane. Kind of the same for this technology. Now, where the analogy begins to fall apart is, remember that by opening more queues in the database engine, you aren't necessarily adding more CPU, memory, or bandwidth resources for these additional queues. The resources you have to begin with begin getting divided when you create additional queues. All you're doing is creating a way for queries to get to the front of the line sooner. Now, by default, Amazon Redshift has two queues, a default queue and then a super user queue. The super user queue is primarily there to ensure that an admin can get in and perform critical tasks no matter what is going on with the default queue. There will always be a few resources dedicated for the super user. When you go in and add additional queues, you must specify how many slots are available in that new queue. This controls how many queries can run concurrently in each queue that you assign. Again, this implies that those resources dedicated to that queue are now going to be further shared by those concurrently running query slots that you identify. So if you have a fast lane queue with 5 slots, essentially what you have now is 5 fast lanes. But if you only have one query currently running in that queue, the other 4 slots sit there with those unused but dedicated resources. So here are some best practices to follow when setting up workload queues. Amazon Redshift only allows up to 8 total queues. And I say if you use all 8, you are far braver than I. I would recommend sticking to only 1 or 2 additional queues beyond that default setting. Amazon Redshift only allows 50 total slots spread across all those queues. And again, if you are anywhere near that limit, I think you're probably doing it wrong. Redshift recommends using 5 or fewer slots per queue, and I agree with that limit. Now, if you do implement workload management, you're going to want to ensure that you understand a couple of key concepts. Some high-level problems that you might end up running into, and that things I definitely think you should be aware of before you tackle workload management. So I'm going to go through that in the form of a QA.